Welcome to Focus, Faith, and Fueling, the Winning Edge podcast, where young athletes, parents, and coaches learn how mindset, nutrition, and faith work together to elevate performance, resilience, and overall health.
What you eat and how you think can elevate and transform your game. If you're ready to gain a true mental edge, fuel your body with purpose, and stay grounded in what truly matters, then this podcast is for you.
We are your hosts. I'm Lindsay, former collegiate athlete, author, coach, and educational coach for over 20 years, and a mom to two young athletes.
And I'm Stacy, sports dietitian, author, speaker, and nutritional consultant for over 19 years, and a mom of two teen athletes. This week, the USDA and Health and Human Services released the 2025-2030 Dietary Guidelines, branded publicly with this simple message: eat real food. These guidelines introduce an inverted food pyramid and emphasize whole, nutrient-dense foods, proteins, dairy, vegetables, fruits, and healthy fats, while calling for strict limits on added sugars, refined carbohydrates, and highly processed, packaged, prepared, and ready-to-eat salty or sweet foods. Not really all that new to public health professionals, but this topic is gaining much traction on social media as transformative to public health. Although the new guidelines do not formally define ultra-processed foods, they highlight highly processed foods as a key driver of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular risk, and poor gut health. And they urge Americans to favor home-prepared, minimally processed fresh foods first, a sentiment which I believe most Americans and health professionals would generally agree with. Certain foods, let's call them treat foods, are meant to be consumed in smaller amounts and less frequently. After all, it's not new that French fries and snack cakes shouldn't be part of our daily dietary routine or intake patterns. However, social media and search interest has spiked around questions like, what counts as highly processed or ultra-processed? And do I have to cut all packaged foods from my diet? How do these guidelines change what I should feed my kids or myself? Making ultra-processed foods and the new guidelines a timely framework for this episode. Today, we're going to unpack what ultra-processed foods are and what these new guidelines mean, especially around ultra-processed foods, and how to navigate real life without going to some crazy extreme. Our guest today to discuss some of these changes and challenges is PhD nutrition scientist Richard Black. Richard Black is the Chief Scientific Officer of WiseCode, a startup company whose mission is to be the source of the most complete, accurate, nutritionally comprehensive food ingredient database. Richard is also an adjunct professor at the Tufts University Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy, a frequent consultant to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on issues concerning nutrition and health, and the chief nutrition advisor at Thrive 365. Richard has over 30 years of experience in the food and beverage industry, having served as the chief nutrition officer and vice president of global nutrition sciences at both Kraft Mondelez and PepsiCo. He is the recipient of IFT's Babcock Hart Award and the inaugural USDA John A. Milner Lectureship Award. Beginning his career as an assistant professor in nutrition sciences at the University of Toronto, Dr. Black attended McMaster University and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry as well as psychology with a PhD in experimental psychology. It is so great to have Dr. Black on with us today, and we are really excited for him to help us break down what the new dietary guidelines means for packaged and processed foods and how we can think about it as it applies to our diet and lifestyle. Richard, it's good to have you on with us today. Thank you for joining us with all of your expertise and knowledge in this space. I'm really excited for our listeners to hear from you. This week's been an interesting week, has it not?
Oh my gosh, Stacey, it has been interesting for certain. Yeah, with the dietary guidelines announcement that everybody's talking about that now.
Well, in the midst of a busy week, again, just thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. So this week, for those that don't know, the USDA and HHS released the 2025-30 Dietary Guidelines with this simple message: eat real food. Tell us a little bit from your perspective, Richard, as you think about, as a scientist, what do these guidelines change, or what do they say to those who maybe aren't familiar with them?
Yeah, really good question, of course. There's a couple things that come out of this guideline that for me jump out that are so different from previous guidelines. And I have to give credit here to the secretaries of Health and Human Services and Secretaries of Agriculture, and that it's a very, very concise document, which is good. So it's very accessible. And they are trying to keep the message very simple in, as you said, eat real food, right? the challenge is, what is the definition of real food in this case? It's not clear. Certainly for real food, if you're thinking, things like steak or chicken or fish or fruits or vegetables or things like that. Yeah, you know it when you see it. But there are so many other levels of this. And that's the one thing I really worry about in this effort to be as succinct and tight as possible in the way they're communicating the message. They're glossing over so much. So like yogurts, and this is an example that's in one of the appendices. They have three different yogurts there that they say, well, this one's minimally processed and this one's slightly processed and this one's highly processed. But there's still real foods in each one of those cases. Those are really, they're yogurts. Yeah, you can have yogurts with and all that sort of thing might be pushing the boundaries. But that's the thing that I really worry about the most. There are a lot of very good ideas. I'm sure you've read this, defining the terms, helping people to understand what they mean. What does Secretary Kennedy mean when he says, eat this kind of food and not that kind of food? And
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of folks were excited. I think even a lot of health professionals were excited to hear them take a stance on ultra processed foods. Junk food, as I would say as a dietitian. We should
Yeah.
eat less junk food. But I think there's a distinguishing line. There's a lot of convenient packaged items my family buys every week and consumes that fit into a healthful diet. And so I think one of the things when I hear, ultra processed foods, and this is without a clear definition, clinicians, I think, sometimes say, well, it's great that they called out ultra processed foods, but we don't really have a clear definition. And why that matters, tell our list, coming from a background in product development and oversight as a chief scientific officer, tell people why that matters.
Sure. The definition of ultra processed foods, and in fact, Secretary Kennedy referred to this when he made the announcement. He didn't refer to it directly, but indirectly, is the NOVA classification. It came out of Brazil. There are four categories, and category 4 in NOVA is the ultra processed food category. When the secretary made the announcement of the dietary guidelines, he referred to the fact that about 70% of the diet is ultra processed, I think. Now, the problem with that set of criteria is that it is so broad. So I could show you an example of a yogurt, and I'm pulling it up in front of me visually, but Yo Crunch vanilla yogurt. I'm not sure who makes it. Maybe it's Yoplait. I'm not sure, but Yo Crunch, because Yo Crunch is probably Yoplait. And it's got aluminum lake blue number 1, aluminum lake blue number 2, aluminum lake pigment red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, artificial flavors, corn dextrins, corn syrup in it, blue number 1, all these different ingredients. You go, holy moly, that's an ultra processed food. Yeah, I get it. But there's another one I have. And it's Nancy's probiotic whole milk yogurt.
And this one this one is considered ultra processed.
This is also considered ultra processed by Nova.
Okay.
And it's got pectin and tapioca starch. And those two things are added to make it thicker. And so it's more appealing.
Who likes a runny yogurt? I mean,
Exactly.
Extra person, Richard. If it's not Greek yogurt, it at least has to be a thicker yogurt.
And yet because of that makes it ultra processed. And there's no reason you would avoid eating that one because it's yogurt, just a little bit of thickener in there. And the thickener is pectin, which is a dietary fiber, and some starch. You probably have cornstarch in your cupboard.
But I think it's so interesting to hear you say that. And for a lot of our listeners who are really new to nutrition and they're learning about the science of nutrition, those ingredients, pectin, tapioca starch, they sound concerning. From someone with a food science background, again,
yeah.
How commonly are those used? I mean, you talked a little bit about what they're used for. I think there's always concern that there's a risk. I actually did a video just last night because a friend had sent me, somebody was standing in a Costco and talking about when they're water chilling chicken, that they have to now mark on package the percent solution that is retained. And they were trying to communicate to consumers that the 9% was 9% chlorine and other chemicals. And I had to do a video to explain that that's not actually what it means. And the solution they're probably washing it in is a lot smaller. And the percentage that's actually would be consumed because it's a heat sensitive molecule is probably not what they're communicating. So talk to us about Just, I think a lot of times there's a lot of confusion. If you can't pronounce an ingredient, if you don't know what it is, share with our audience a little bit more on those two, but also kind of broadly on these additives.
Yeah. So I want to come back to the definition as well and
Okay.
how these are defined. But on that particular example, pectin, I remember as a kid, my mom used to make strawberry jam. Pectin, it was something she would add to the strawberry jam as a thickener. Otherwise, it was really, really runny jam. And that was available. Starch is a common ingredient. And as I said, cornstarch is typically what people have in their kitchen or in their pantry. I know I have cornstarch in the pantry. But tapioca is just starch derived from tapioca as opposed to corn, and that's fairly straightforward. But I can understand that people, when they don't recognize ingredients, it's really off-putting. I get that.
I'm just going to make sure our listeners are catching this. So, those two yogurts are both considered ultra processed. One with
Exactly.
pectin and tapioca starch, and one that has a list of chemical additives. That's where most health professionals are concerned with this NOVA classification system, because when Secretary Kennedy says 70% of the products we're consuming are ultra processed foods, well, is it because of the way we're classifying it? Is that what you're getting to?
It's because of this super broad classification. Now, you know, I think kudos to Carlos Montero, who was the gentleman that developed this, to raise the issue, because until he raised it, people talked about junk foods, but this notion of level of processing and all these different additives that might be in the foods for a variety of different reasons really hadn't risen to the fore. And his research really brought that forward. But the definition that he put in place is so broad that it lumps in that yogurt that I just described, which just has a bit of pectin, a bit of tapioca starch, no flavors, no sweeteners, no nothing else. It's yogurt, like the lactobacillus, bacteria, Thermophilus, and milk, and then these thickeners. It lumps that in with a Snickers bar, right? It doesn't distinguish between those and M&Ms. It doesn't
Yeah.
distinguish between those and a Coca-Cola
Because
and things
Nova
like that.
doesn't have, and I think this is something important to stress to our listeners, it doesn't have a nutrient density
It doesn't.
scoring capacity to it. So it's not telling you, it's not sort of weighting, is how processed is this? What ingredients are being used, what methods are being used, and then also in return for that, what's the nutrition quality I'm getting, which is then why we see a Snickers bar
In the same
equaling.
category.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm going to get to like a different way of looking at processed foods in a second. But there was a great study that was published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition about 3 years ago, and it asked people who are skilled in the arts, such as dietitians, to look at a bunch of different foods and say, are these Nova 1, Nova 2, Nova 3, Nova 4? Those are the four categories within Nova. Nova 1 would be a single ingredient food like meat or fish or a potato or a strawberry. That's Nova 1. And Nova 4 is the ultra processed foods. And then 2 and 3 are in the middle. And they did branded foods. And they had about 120 foods. I don't know how many people there were doing the assessment, but there were 40 or 50, something like that. They only could agree on 3 foods, like only 3 of the 120 foods. Everybody agreed, oh, it belongs in this category. And when they did generic foods, they had a little bit less, or 110 or something. They only agreed on 1 food, and that happened to be a banana. Everybody agreed a banana. That's Nova 1. But all the other foods, they didn't agree on. And in fact, in the generic foods, about 80% of the foods, somebody placed it in each one of the 4 categories. And so part of the problem is, I think Nova said, if you have any one of these single things, it's like a contamination, boom, you're automatically ultra processed. Doesn't matter that you only have like angel dust levels and you only have one of those little things. No, sorry, that makes you ultra processed. So what I think a lot of people are now looking at, and certainly this is what we're advocating at Wise Code and others, don't just don't say it's just one and done. Like, oh my gosh, you've got one of these, you're there for. We're trying to say, okay, how processed are the individual ingredients? How many of those individual ingredients are in there? And can you kind of get a sense of the degree of processing. It's not like yes, no. With no, it seems to be you're either ultra processed or you're not.
The first question that comes to mind is I think some of our listeners would say, well, why not just leave it the way it is? Talk about being someone who's worked on the side of producing and trying to sell products. And I even think about this being passionate about promoting fruits and vegetable consumption. And, we've tried forever to promote ugly fruit and vegetable consumption, and people eat with their eyes, whether they,
People eat with their eyes. Absolutely.
yeah. So talk about what that does to a product that you're trying to launch.
I can give you a couple really interesting ones, but for everybody to understand my background, I started in academics and nutrition science, and I went into the food industry. I worked for a number of different large companies. In the last two large companies I worked for, I was the chief nutrition officer and VP nutrition at PepsiCo. And then prior to that at Kraft and Mondelez. And so had a lot of experience in trying to improve the nutritional quality of the foods. And people would say to me, if you're doing nutrition, why are you working for a company like PepsiCo? And I'm going to get to the examples in just a second. People, you have to realize that I think the number is something like 1.3 billion times each day, somebody is eating a serving of a PepsiCo product. 1.3 billion times each day, there's a serving of a PepsiCo product being eaten. So if I can influence as a nutrition person, if I can influence the recipe for those products and make them a little bit healthier, just a little bit healthier across whatever dimension it is, in the aggregate, you can have a really big impact on public health. And that's why you get involved in these kind of things. An example of when I was at Kraft makes Jello, and you can get Jello cups, right? And we were Jello fruit cups. They have actually bits of fruit in them. You've got to have at least half a serving of fruit in this cup, which is like a quarter cup of fruit, before you can say it's a fruit cup. And they went, okay, fine. And they developed a product like that, and it bombed. Why? People said it's got too much fruit in the Jello. Too much fruit. Yeah, too much fruit. And it wasn't appealing as Jello. They're looking for it to be Jello with a bit of fruit in it. And
Yeah.
we were from a nutrition side saying, no, 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 no. You've got to have more fruit in there. Otherwise, I don't want to hear you talking about fruit. But to that end, you see, people are looking at it and saying, and then, so now think back to the yogurt. You think of the yogurt, and if I say to you, I've got some lemon curd here for you to eat as a spread on something, what color do you expect that to be?
I expect it to be yellow.
Yeah. Or I've got my wife makes this lemon pudding, baked pudding thing. Oh my gosh, is it ever good? I love lemon. What color is it? There's a yellow in there. And so there is an expectation for many people that lemon means a little bit of yellow.
Yeah.
And so there's that expectation. Are there yogurts out there? Yeah, there are, that has specific flavor profiles, and they chose not to color their yogurts, and that's fine too. That's absolutely fine. And you can find yogurts that are lemon, not colored at all, but a little bit of coloring for those people that want it. That's probably not a bad thing. Massive amounts of coloring, that could be a different issue.
It's one thing if you're consuming a diet that's very high in products that are high in
Mhm.
those additives. But as I'm thinking and listening to you, when we hear 60% of the American population's diet is made up of ultra processed foods, are they more than half of our calories because of the way we're classifying them? And actually, some of those foods we're calling ultra processed are very much like some of the items I might have today inside of my
Absolutely.
pantry that make dinner really convenient and easy and actually are full of nutrition with minimal processing, but they're being
Yeah.
classified as an ultra processed food.
Yeah. Take breakfast cereals, and I'm a breakfast cereal eater, and breakfast cereals are just lumped entirely into the almost entirely 90 something percent into the ultra processed bucket. But if you look at it, like I just have an example of Special K, Kellogg Special K, because there's a broad range of Special K cereals. I can show you a cereal that I would say is really minimally processed. And I can show you one that I would say is super ultra processed. I mean, it's really heavy on the colors and the additives and everything else. And that's to your point that there's a range of foods that are all bucketed in there. And there's some that, they're actually, I know they're called ultra processed by the NOVA categorization, but it's really a lot of good stuff. Now, there are other ultra processed foods, super ultra processed foods. There's a lot of stuff in there and not a lot of good.
Yeah. Breakfast cereals is a fascinating one to me because we use them a lot with our athletes. I mean, when they want to snack at nighttime and I need them to get in more carbohydrates or more calories and pair it with some milk so they're getting protein, that's just a great way to get in a load of nutrition, B vitamins, folic acid,
Absolutely.
iron a lot of times because those are fortified. different than choosing like Fruity Pebbles.
Exactly. And that's exactly the point. You can choose smartly in a breakfast cereal category, just as you said, to get a good carbohydrate load, relatively complex carbohydrates. I'm thinking here shredded wheat and those kind of products. And then when you put the milk on top of it, it's a really good meal. If you look at the proportion of times that a breakfast cereal is eaten with milk versus without milk, it's something in the high 80% level. But you, it's 80 something, 87%, I think, of the eating occasions where people eat a breakfast cereal, they're having milk on that breakfast cereal, regardless of when they're having it. So, as you said, it's interesting to me that you recommend that to your athletes. Right. Response when you do that.
Parents oftentimes will have more of a response than the kiddos because I think, and this is something we talk about a lot with when we're coaching parents and athletes, a lot of times you'll have parents come in because parents are very health minded and they want their kiddos to be also focused on making good health decisions. Absolutely. We all do. But nutrition for a young active athlete is very different than nutrition for a woman who might be borderline overweight or obese and who's in premenopause or perimenopause. That's something I think we don't understand as a population. And so, where she might be hearing from her doctor, you need a more low carb, moderate protein dietary approach, which might be appropriate for her. For these young kiddos, I mean, I have some kids, male athletes going through puberty that they're swimming multiple times a day. They're running, they're competing in multiple sports. What they need nutritionally and how they're going to get that. I don't know how they're going to get those calories without some of these foods that we have now really just kind of maliciously labeled. Now, there's the difference in Fruity Pebbles, like I mentioned, and a good cereal that's full of fiber and whole grains and low in added sugar and is giving them the carbs and the nutrition that they need. And I think we've just kind of lumped them all together. And the moment somebody starts trying to decipher that nuance, we start to tune them out. But there's actually some really good stuff in some of these products.
Absolutely. And the challenge I think right now is the guidance that people need. That nutrition's a horribly complicated science, and I understand it's a young science. People that I talk to just socially, yeah, but you guys are always changing your recommendations. The science is always changing. And I say, no, actually, nutrition science doesn't change. What changes is our understanding of that science. We get better and better and better at understanding it. And the more we understand, sometimes we have to go back and say, okay, we used to think this, now we believe it's that way. And well, why can't you just settle on a message? And I say, well, that'd be like saying the computer you bought last month is the best computer they'll ever make.
Right.
Why can't they just, no, it's going to get better
Tomorrow
and
it will
better.
be outlived by something else that's better than it. Yeah.
People accept that because do you really care how the computer's made or do you just care how it functions? And it's how it functions, right?
Right.
Food is so personal and it's every day. I just tell me what I'm supposed to do so I don't mess it up for me. And more importantly, I don't mess it up for my kids.
Yeah.
And it's hard. People look for that kind of guidance. And I'm thinking when you were giving me that story of the moms who might be given one set of advice, they might believe that that advice is equally applicable to everybody in their family because the doctor said, this is a healthy diet.
And this is where I think the science, when you break it down to the physiology, gets really complex and a lot more nuanced. And I think one of the things, I'm grateful to see we're promoting more real foods. I actually think when I think about these new dietary guidance and how simple it was for consumers, it gives people who've always kind of looked at the dietary guidance and it's been so far from where they are a chance to go, okay, this feels more attainable. And so I think that's a really positive thing. But again, one of the scary parts is if you don't personalize it, it's really not that good.
Exactly.
Some of those pictures, we understand, okay, these are relatively good foods, but I think also putting that in the context of what's the portion that's right for me, what's the calorie, what's the servings that are right for me is more difficult than people realize.
I think it is. The one thing I will say, though, also in support of the guidelines, and every time the dietary guidelines come out, there are people that say, bravo, and other people say, are you absolutely out of your mind? Every time. But what I think it is fair to say is that if on the whole is a sort of a step away from or less consumption of the really highly processed foods and those that just think super colorful foods, if there's a diminishment in those, I'm willing to bet that you'll see that that would also correlate with a slight decrease in total calories consumed. It might also tie into more fiber being consumed, probably fewer simple carbohydrates being consumed. Not massive amounts, but a little bit. And I'm hopeful that we might start to see a shift because it really elevates the visibility of how processed our food supply has become. Now, you might hear people say, "Oh, the food industry is going to get all up in arms. They're going to lobby, blah 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 blah." No, I think what's going to happen is the food industry is going to have to respond,
For
and the
sure.
way, yeah, they're going to respond in a way that you get less processed, but still processed, but less processed foods, because our whole supply system. You could talk about eating farm fresh, but
Most folks who aren't familiar with agriculture and food industry don't understand the limitations we have from a supply chain perspective to feed the amount of people we feed inside the US and globally with some of those resources and what that would mean.
absolutely. But think about foods that are processed. Triscuit biscuits. Triscuits, I think they're whole wheat, some oil, and salt.
Oh yeah, 3 ingredients. And those are
Three
one of my
ingredients.
favorite crackers, and they're so good because they are just a great source of fiber, whole wheat, to your point, something that's a really simple, clean ingredient, but would be considered a processed food.
Yeah, and so funny story on I've told this one before on Triscuits. Kraft at the time, was launching a lower sodium version of Triscuits, and it was Triscuits low sodium. Product bombed, just did not go at all. And then they came back and they relaunched the product, had the same amount of sodium in it, same amount of salt, but now they said Triscuits hint of salt.
I think it's really fascinating because, again, it goes back to people say they want this, but then when they don't buy it and a company has just invested resources in making that better for you in some way, a lot of times what it tells your chief financial officer or your chief marketer, people don't want that.
Yes, absolutely. So the hint of salt thing migrated across. It's in Ritz, it's in wheat thins, and I think a lot of other brands have taken that up. Because when I say it's got a hint of something, you say, "Well, I'm going to be able to taste that. It's got a hint of salt in it." But if I say it's low sodium or low salt, you're going to go, "Well, it's going to
It's
taste
going
like
to taste like a
cardboard."
shoe.
Yeah,
Who
exactly.
wants to buy that?
It was just a bit of creative thinking around how do you convey the message.
Yeah, same product, both reduced in sodium, but a different message to the consumer that makes them say, well, and I also think that's such a conundrum for so many folks is that when we think about healthy packaged food or healthy food that is available, sometimes I think we equate or people have for a long time healthy with not tasting good.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a common link that people go, it was healthy, it's not gonna taste any good. There are a lot of things that taste very, very good that are very, very healthy as well.
I have to ask you this question, given your background and just working to help companies make their products more nutritious as a chief scientist. What work you're most proud of? And you talk about PepsiCo. When you make a change, you're truly making a change for population health.
Yeah. One of it's interesting that you have to get the incentives right within the company. And this is another example I've used in other conversations I've had where when PepsiCo made this commitment to reduce sodium in Lay's potato chips by 25%.
Okay.
That's the target, 25%.
When
Okay.
was this? Like how long ago? Because I think sometimes people think the industry hasn't been policing themselves for a while, and they really
Yeah,
have.
this was about 2011 or 2012 when they made the commitment, and then I started working for PepsiCo in 2013. And when I'm working, I go down, I visit the people at Frito-Lay. How is this going on the sodium commitment? Well, we're not doing it. What do you mean? It's a commitment. I can't get to 25%. Okay, well, can you cut 10% out? And the guy said, I could do that tomorrow. You could do that tomorrow. Well, why don't you do that? And he said, Richard, what don't you understand? The goal is 25%. If I only get 10 out, that's a failure because I'm only incentivized to get 25% out. So I'm not even going to bother getting 10 out because why would I do that and spend money trying to do that when I know it's still not going to be what I'm supposed to get
It's
to?
not going to hit the
And
target. Well, and I think that's fascinating because,
we changed the targets. We
right.
had to go to the very top. This is and say, look, you've got to change the targets here. You've got to give stepwise goals
Yeah.
so people can get 10, 15, 20, 25% out. And if you exceed the goals, my gosh, then you're really going to get a bonus this year. But it was as simple as that, just saying, how are we incentivizing the people to make those changes? And so we did that for sugars. And that was, I think, really a huge win for really changing the way people in the product development side thought about improving the foods. Doesn't make them health foods.
Right.
That wasn't the goal. It's just small steps to make the foods healthier than they were.
I think the takeaway there, and often something I think many folks who don't work in these industries are really surprised, is that there's work been happening in some of these spaces for many years. You talk about that work, and that was 15 years ago. And I don't know if many folks know this, but the voluntary sodium reduction guidance that's been happening behind the scenes that many manufacturers haven't been communicating. If you go and look, sodium has been being reduced in products across the
Absolutely.
grocery store, but it was done slowly reducing it so the consumer didn't notice it, palatability,
Exactly.
taste wise,
Yep.
and they'd still purchase the product, but also we were doing something good for their health.
Yeah, absolutely true. One of the other things that we learned, and this was when I was at Kraft, we had something like 10,000 different products. And some of them are big sellers and some of them are small sellers. And you might have a very small selling product and maybe you could reduce the sodium by half, 50% reduction. But because the product sold so little, it really wasn't adding much to the overall consumption of sodium in the diet. You might have had that product 2 times a year, 3 times a year. On the other hand, if you have a cottage cheese, people eat cottage cheese, they eat a lot of cottage cheese. And cottage cheese, it turns out, has a fair hit of sodium in it, but you're not eating it for the sodium hit, right? You don't, I got to have something salty, give me some cottage cheese. No, no. So in the cottage cheese, we were actually able to get like a 35% reduction in sodium on cottage cheese. It wasn't the 50% that something else could get. But for those people that ate cottage cheese on a regular basis, for their health, that was a huge, huge win
Yeah, because it's a
because it's
great
just,
nutrient dense food. A lot of nutrition
and
in
the,
cottage cheese.
yeah, and a lot of the production was based on, well, that's the way we always used to do it. We add this much salt to it.
How much
Well,
of
when
that
we back
happens every day in all assets of life? Well, we just always did it that way.
off a little bit, oh, that's not the way we've done it before. Well, let's just try. Let's just try. And with the cottage cheese, it works. Fun story though, a Kraft Singles. Kraft Singles. In the States, it's Kraft Singles. In the UK, it's called Dairy Lee. Dairy Lee Singles. Same product. And they did a huge sodium reduction in Dairy Lee Singles in the UK. Nobody noticed. Great success. Let's do the same thing here in the US. And they did exactly the same reduction. And the complaints were through the roof. When you tasted the cheese, you can't tell the difference. But the lower sodium content cheese didn't melt. You eat cold cheese sandwiches in the UK.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's
How do you
fascinating.
eat cheese slices here in the US? You
Yeah, we
put it
make
on
a
a ham
grilled cheese.
or grilled cheese. When you put it in a grilled cheese and you pull it apart, you want that cheese to be gooey.
Ugh,
Lower sodium cheese doesn't do that.
that's fascinating. Oh my
Isn't
gosh.
that
Okay.
wild?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so that's the cultural specificity thing. And that was one thing I was gonna say the dietary guidelines this time did not account for is cultural specificity of foods. I believe it should have at some level, just to acknowledge different styles of eating. I want to say one other quick point.
yeah.
You were talking about and how nutrition is personal. With smartphones, it's possible now, and I know that's Wise Code is doing, it's possible to make it easily personalizable to you or to your family as a whole. So I would encourage your listeners to look at the different tools that are out there. If you have a smartphone, either Google Store or the Apple, you have the Wise Code one. It's a really easy app to use, but there are other apps that too so you can personalize and it helps. It just helps you understand and helps you make those choices.
Well, if I had a crystal ball, that's what I would predict is the future of this space is it
I think
needs
so.
to be personalized. I think the dietary guidelines for Americans are directionally going in a good direction. We're reducing added sugars. We're talking about marketing those products to kids. We're calling out there's an opportunity for some of these highly processed foods to have a negative impact on health. We know that from the literature. We're increasing protein recommendations because the RDA was meant for preventing chronic disease and not for promoting optimal health. And so it's good to see those. However, I think personalization will be the future of what we see in this space, Richard. And I think data will help us do that.
I agree. I agree. Absolutely true.
So for our listeners, anything else that we didn't cover that you wanted to cover?
So I'll just one plea or piece of advice. Don't get disheartened by all the mixed messages that are out there on nutrition. There are some truly good sources of information. And I think at a very high level, the dietary guidelines that have come out now are going to move us in the right direction. Honestly, I think they're a bit fuzzy, but they kind of, it's moving in the right direction. So please don't get disheartened by it. I think this is going to get easier as we go along, and the smartphones and so on, that's going to make it even easier. I think we're really on the cusp of seeing a fundamental change in the way people can leverage data and information. We should be getting
I
there soon.
love that advice. I think it's so wise. One of the things I think dietitians have said for many years is eat whole foods first, right? That should be the base of any diet. And then some of these other foods that are convenient, They're meant for a purpose. They're helping you fill in. There's times when you need a convenient option. There's times when you need a shelf stable option because you may not always get the chance and time to go to the grocery store every single day and you don't live
And
on a
don't
farm.
beat yourself up about it. Don't beat yourself up about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, if listeners could take only one thing away from our conversation, kind of give us the top line of what should it be? What should they take away when they think about ultra processed foods and really what that means for them individually?
Yeah. I would say for the time, like in the near term, because the government has not come up with a definition yet. For the near term, you'll know it when you see it. And if you wonder, I wonder if this is ultra processed, it probably isn't that bad. Because when you see ultra processed, you're going to know
Yeah.
all those ingredients, all those colors, all those preservatives, you're going to know. And if you're not sure, you're probably fine.
Yeah. Or ask an expert.
Or ask an expert. Yep.
Yeah.
Ask an expert.
Yeah, I love it. Well, and thank you, Richard. We'll have to have you back on to kind of talk more of the science and just, you're such a wealth of knowledge. And I think a lot of times there's a lot of fear. Maybe what we'll do with this episode is we'll ask our listeners to tell us what food additives or ingredients they want to learn about.
Yeah. Or if they have other questions in general that might stimulate other conversations. I mean, I really enjoyed this. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it. And we hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did and having a great conversation.
Thanks, Stacey.
Stay tuned for more real-world tips and conversations with coaches, athletic directors, current and former collegiate and professional athletes, sports dietitians, sports psychologists, and other performance experts.
If this episode gave you something to chew on, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe. Nutrition is important, but let's be honest, we've all got to eat. So help us feed this podcast so we can keep fueling you.
Don't forget to join the Span Athletics community to get more exclusive content by following us on all of our social media platforms, including TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and X at @span_athletics.
Until next time, stay faithful, stay fueled, and remain focused on your goals.